Good? Okay. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Apologies for the technical difficulties. But if that's the worst thing that happens today in this place, I'll feel good about it. I want to thank you all for being here today to discuss something that is not a partisan issue, but an American issue, keeping our promise to our Afghan allies. And I want to remind us how we got here. On 9/11, 2 planes flew into the Twin Towers and attacked us here at home. Firemen were pulling people from the rubble, families were searching for their loved ones, and fear had swept the country. In the aftermath, we came together to protect our nation, and people from all walks of life signed up to help us. Americans enlisted in the military, NATO allies came to our aid, and local Afghans joined our fight against the Taliban. The pledge we made to our service members and our allies is that if you promise to help our country, we promise to protect you and take care of you when you come home. This was always about promises and keeping promises. And when you keep promises, you keep people alive. By the end of 2024, we were steadily working to uphold this commitment to our veterans and our Afghan allies. The Biden administration resettled thousands of Afghans through the special immigration visa and UF refugee admissions programs. Those in the United States were granted humanitarian parole and temporary protection status. Congress even passed a bipartisan bill codifying the State Department's coordinator for Afghan relocation efforts. This work was not only bipartisan, it was a key priority for my Republican colleagues.
To our friends and allies who were left in Afghanistan in August of 21, every day has been an abandonment and unfortunately broken promises.
We have failed in our obligation to help many of these Afghans. We owe them to help them get into our country with these visas.
The families, veterans, our Afghan allies deserve transparency. They deserve answers.
I hope the mission is to get our people out, to get the Afghan people out that have supported us and whose lives are in danger.
The total betrayal of our allies of Afghanistan has seriously damaged our credibility as an ally.
Biden left behind brave interpreters who worked with the United States.
Talk and convey to those left behind, both the Americans and our allies, you're not forgotten.
I rise today in support of legislation called the Hope and Allies Act to support our interpreters in Afghanistan.
There is no greater urgency for your department than to bring safely to the United States those who have helped us in Afghanistan during the global war on terror.
So I invited my Republican colleagues here today, and I am disappointed that they did not make time to attend, especially given that video. Last Congress, HVAC Republicans held 11 committee events on Afghanistan and led a months-long investigation concluding that, quote, the U.S. government should uphold our commitment to those brave Afghans who risked their lives fighting for freedom from the Taliban. But fast forward to today, and this administration seemed to have forgotten why keeping our promises matter. In fact, it seems to relish breaking every promise we've made, and our veterans and Afghan allies have borne the brunt of that. On day one, the Trump administration suspended the U.S. refugee admissions program, severing a crucial lifeline for Afghans hoping to resettle in the United States. Then Rubio dismantled the Afghan Relocation Office, violating a law Congress passed a few months earlier to protect it. Not only did these decisions leave Afghan allies behind, they stranded over 1,000 Afghans at the Relocation Processing Center at Camp Asila, where they are living a humanitarian nightmare created by this administration. Yet when I raised the fate of these Afghans to the top State Department official overseeing the camp at a hearing last year, he didn't even know what CAS was. The administration has gone after the Afghans who believed they had finally reached safety in the United States. In June, ICE started detaining Afghan asylum seekers at their immigration hearings. In July, Kristi Noem terminated their TPS. By the end of 2025, the Trump administration had dismantled every remaining protection for Afghan allies seeking a future in the United States. Homeland Security even announced it would review prior green card and asylum approvals, making clear that not even Afghans with permanent legal status can escape this administration's cruelty. And what were Republicans' response as the administration broke our promise over and over again? Crickets. HVAC Republicans have held zero committee activity on Afghanistan this Congress, despite a formal request Ranking Member Meeks and I sent our counterparts last July. When my bipartisan provision to reestablish the CARE Office made it into the final version of NDAA, Republican leadership yanked it out days before it passed into law. Every American will suffer the consequences of this administration's betrayal, just as Republicans warned last Congress. Because the implications go far beyond Afghanistan and our Afghan allies. What's at stake here is the fundamental credibility of our commitments and promises. Screwing over every partner and ally we have does not make Americans safer. If the United States cannot be trusted to stand by those who stood by us, no country or person in their right mind would work with us. And that is a scary, lonely world of our own making. This downward trajectory is entirely reversible. The administration can end the freeze on SIV and refugee relocation. Republicans can work with us to pass new special immigration visas. The administration can work through the SIV backlog and relocate every eligible Afghan in just a few years. We can still keep our promise. Not doing so is a choice that this administration and this Republican majority are making every single day. Over 20 years ago, we started this chapter in service of a just cause. Now we are ending it by penetrating the harm. We are perpetrating the harm and penetrating the goodness that we were trying to combat. Okay, that came out wrong. But we owe more to the veterans and allies who sacrificed on our behalf. Today, let's remind ourselves why keeping our promises matter. I'm going to introduce our witnesses, and then I would allow my colleague, Congressman Keating, who I know has a personal friendship with one of our witnesses, to say some words. There are many Afghan voices I wish I could be represented here today. If it were not for the retaliation they face, or they might face, for sharing their story. Those at CAS, those whose TPS was terminated, those who have been harassed by ICE, and those left behind in Afghanistan. But we are honored to have a distinguished panel of witnesses here today to shine a light on the importance of keeping our promise. Zia Ghafoori, a former interpreter and cultural advisor with U.S. Special Forces, and who came to the U.S. on an SIV in 2014 and is the CEO of the Interpreting Freedom Foundation. Thank you for being here. Catalina Gasper, a retired U.S. Navy intelligence officer who deployed to Afghanistan in 2008, 18, and 19, and worked very closely with Afghan SIVs. Thank you for your service and for being here today. Jessica Bradley Rushing, Chief of Staff at AfghanEvac and a former staffer at the State Department's Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts. Thank you for being here. And Dr. Kyleanne Hunter, the CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and a former U.S. Marine Corps Major. Thank you for your service and for being here today. So before I have the witnesses speak, Congressman Keating, if you'd like to say some words.
Well, I'd like to thank the ranking member for having this shadow hearing. It's the result of efforts that were futile to try and get a full committee hearing on the Foreign Affairs Committee on this important issue. You mentioned the number of hearings and the attention that was focused before, and now at this time of great need for those that have done so much to support our country, they refuse to have a hearing. Let me just share a brief story that I did have. Recently, I visited a detention center in my district to visit a man that was being detained there. I'd never met him, but the reason I went was in part because of another man I met years before. When we were involved in a war in Afghanistan, like so many of our colleagues, I went to visit and support our troops, and importantly, to remember all the other troops from other countries that were there, NATO troops supporting the U.S. Under Article 5. So I went as I had been before, talking to our Marines and the other soldiers that were with us. And I remember saying what I would typically say, if there's anything we can ever do to help you, please let us know. And this time, they said, yes, there actually is something you could do to help. And I said, anything. So that evening, I went with the group of the Marines into the village in Helmand Province in Afghanistan, and they asked me to meet a man that was there. And I was glad to. I said, tell me about this man. They said, well, we think it would mean a lot to have a member of the U.S. Congress come in and thank him. And we'll tell you why. He's a person that has worked day in and day out, risking his life, telling us where the location of IED explosives were, saving our lives, putting his own life in enormous danger in the process. We think, sadly, that he probably will never survive the brave mission he took on himself, but we want to make sure we can do everything we can for him, and certainly we want to know how grateful we are. So I went down to the village, and this man was there, and I thanked him on behalf of our Congress and the people of the United States for what he was doing to help in our effort, but also to save American lives in the process of our brave young men and women that were serving our country. And I was so moved, almost to tears, when I asked him why he was doing it, and he pulled out his young son, about 8 or 9 years old, and he said, I want him to have the same chance. I want him to have the same chance that he has in your country, the ability to learn, to read and write, and to have an education. And that's all I want. That's why I'm doing this. And as I said, I was almost moved to tears, and just looking at the feeling he had for democracy, the feeling he had for the importance of it for his own son. Now, I don't know what happened to that man, although there was a targeting, I was told, because they were aware he was helping, and I hope to God somehow he might have survived. So I remember that story when I went to visit a person being held by the United States government in its own detention center. Because that man was someone who was very similar to the man that I had met in Afghanistan. He had spent 4 years of his life helping Americans in their cause of democracy, working as a translator, giving vital information, giving cultural information that was so important. In short, saving American soldiers' lives. And he was being held there, and I said, perhaps somehow I can come and talk to him the way I did that other man that was there. He told me what had happened to him. He told me the ICE agents interrogating him had said, you better listen to me because the American government is weak. We're the strong ones. And if you don't cooperate, if you don't decide to leave this country and to go home, we're going to send you to Iran or Russia. This is what they were saying, these agents, to this brave American who had 5 children he brought with him from Afghanistan, who had a wife and was employed in a company, making a living, helping our economy go and helping bring his kids forward in hope for a green card. And he told me in the process that he followed the State Department's directions to a T, that they had brought him and decided that he and his family have to be protected in Pakistan because he was already targeted by the Taliban. They had gone to his home, raided his home. Fortunately for him, he wasn't there, but his brother was, and they grabbed his brother and tortured his brother. So he came here. He was giving an SIV visa. He has given instructions by the State Department. He followed them religiously. In fact, they suggested that for his own safety, he should leave Pakistan and maybe get a probation status in the United States where he would be safer. So he came here, brought his family, worked hard, and was at the cusp of getting a green card as he was going into a facility in another state to get his biometrics to go towards that green card, where he had an appointment made to do so. So he went in the front door there, and he came out the back door, and there were 6 masked men waiting for him. A person here legally, a person here following the directions of our own government, a person that saved American lives, and they seized him and tried to move him out of the country within 24 hours, skirting due process. Fortunately, he had an attorney at the time and they didn't do the process correctly, where that was stayed by the time I went visiting him. These are individuals that loved our country, that loved our ideals, that wanted the type of government and democracy we had for his own son. And he too was risking his life to help our soldiers go forward. Who could not ask for a better person to live with us, be our neighbor, and be a part of our country? Yet there he was, in detention. So we're having this hearing today because, unfortunately, this isn't an isolated incident. This is happening time and time again, and even worse, the Trump administration has moved forward to close the remaining relocation pathways for Afghan allies that we had into this country, and to suspend the adjudication of legal status for Afghans already here. And if they have to go back, sentencing them and their family to possible death and torture. This is not what our country's about. This is not what the promise is about. And I see veterans here in this room. And I want to thank them, not just for their service, but for remembering that they fought for a country that should be true to its word when we're getting help from allies as they're trying to save our soldiers as well. Thank you for your presence here today. It's very important. So lastly, I would like to hear from all of you, and I thank our ranking member, Kamlager-Dove, for all her work. This has been a cause of hers. It's been a cause of mine. It's been a cause of so many members of Congress. And it used to be a very vocal and strong bipartisan effort. But the silence is deafening. This is why we're having this hearing. This is why we have to go forward. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say to the American people. Because I believe in justice. And I believe if we're taking our case here today to the American people themselves, then this will make a difference. So I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Keating, for those powerful and heartfelt words. Mr. Ghafoori, I would now like to recognize you for your opening statement.
Thank you, Ranking Member Sidney Kamlager-Dove. It's an honor to appear before you and our respectful leaders gathered here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to raise urgent concern that are profoundly affecting our community during an already difficult moment. So I want to be clear at the outset, I'm not here to advocate for any political party, Republican or Democrat. I'm here to share lived experiences, and I have served with both parties, the soldiers who were in the battlefield in Afghanistan. So my name is Zia Ghafoori. I'm a former U.S. Army Special Forces interpreter, and I have worked more than decades with our men and women uniform in different units Army Special Forces, Marine, Rangers, Navy SEALs, and other intelligence units that they were deployed in Afghanistan. Our mission, in 2018, I founded the Interpreting Freedom Foundation to support and help our Afghan allies who are coming to the United States, who are in needs of the new law, rule, and regulations that they are not familiar with. So we founded the Interpreting Freedom Foundation to assist our Afghan allies and our SIVs recipient here in the United States. Today my own family remain in Pakistan. They have completed their interviews, their medical examinations, and when the President Donald J. Trump took over the office, unfortunately, our family left behind in Pakistan since then. But they were just waiting for the travel dates to come to the United States to live in a peaceful country that we are here today. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it. And one of my friends that he provided countless intelligence reports during our operation in Afghanistan, he separated from his family. His daughter lives in the United States. His daughter evacuated in 2021, in August 2021. His parents, what remain families, they live in Qatar right now, at the base in Qatar. But they don't know what to do, how to reunite with their families, and they could not able to go back to Afghanistan because he was providing critical information for us to support our national security. So if we send those kind of Afghans who stayed with us, so they will get killed and tortured in Afghanistan. And you guys already know that Pakistan, Iran, and all those neighbor countries are deporting all those Afghans, deporting those individuals who supported the United States. Nobody believed on those allies because they supported our cause, the United States. So I'm here today to support those families and bring those concerns to you guys, to both parties, that we should pay attention to this kind of allies who stood with us, who took a bullet for both nations, who fought for 2 decades, and they don't know where to turn. But right now, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are hunting our Afghan allies across the country, in Afghanistan, in every provinces. So I don't know, there's any media to release those videos. That's what's happening with our allies in Afghanistan. So they're getting tortured and they are getting killed and nobody cares about them. And we are receiving countless phone calls, emails from the children that they lost their fathers, from the families who are begging to find a safe place, and even they do not have any job in Afghanistan because nobody will give him a job. They could not walk safe outside because they serve our country, our United States, and the Afghanistan government. And today, the whole world watching what is the Taliban are doing there. They're banning the schools for the women. There is no rights for the young women to go to school, to have a better education, and to raise a beautiful family in the environment. But unfortunately, those kids will be a suicide bomber because ISIS are increasing every day across the in Afghanistan. Our allies are reporting that. We have countless ISIS that they are exist in Afghanistan. They are fighting against the United States, against any foreign countries who could have hand on it.
Thank you. Thank you. I now would like to recognize Ms. Gasper for your opening statement and want to recognize Congressman Latimer from New York joining us.
Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove and committee members, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Catalina Gasper. I'm a retired U.S. Navy intelligence commander with 24 years of active duty service. I served in Afghanistan in 2008, 2018, and 2019, supervising 65 special immigrant visa eligible staff during my last deployment. In July 2019, I was injured in a Taliban attack and medically evacuated. Before leaving, I promised my Afghan allies I wouldn't forget them. During the evacuation, I assisted SIVs, but only 7 of my SIV families escaped Afghanistan. When the Department of State established the Office of the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, CARE, fulfilling my promise finally felt possible. The SIV program promised Afghan nationals who served the U.S. government an immigration pathway. But this pathway was disrupted in August 2021 when the U.S. Embassy was closed. CARE reopened that pathway. While CARE was active, dozens of my SIV families completed visa processing and arrived in the U.S. However, CARE relocation flights stopped in January 2025. Then came the tragic shooting of National Guard members in D.C., and in the aftermath was Presidential Proclamation 10-998, suspending visa issuance to Afghan nationals, including Afghan SIVs. In addition to the presidential proclamation came the full suspension of chief of mission processing. At the same time, increased ICE operations left all immigrants, including Afghan allies, fearful for their continuing place in U.S. society. Since Kabul fell, I have helped the remaining SI-eligible Afghan allies that I supervised. 9 are awaiting calm approval, while 11 have interview-ready cases, but have no way to attend interviews or get their visas issued. 8 families traveled to Islamabad for their interviews in late 2025. 4 were unable to get their SIVs before issuance stopped, resulting in their detention and deportation back to Afghanistan, where they now face serious risks from the Taliban. My efforts have cost tens of thousands of dollars and required assistance from nonprofits, including No One Left Behind and Task Force Argo. 3 families were able to get their visas issued and resettled in the U.S. with the help of nonprofit Keeping Our Promise. 1 family received 2 adult visas, but their infant's visa was denied due to a spelling error, and the new policy changes now make the baby ineligible. The family must choose between leaving their child or waiting for visa services to resume and risking their own eligibility. As for the others I supervise that are left behind in Afghanistan, they have endured extreme poverty and live every day to feed their families. They can't find employment because of their previous work with the DoD. Some have been detained by the Taliban, beaten and interrogated for weeks. One of them watched their oldest son beat to death by the Taliban. Many have lost their homes, which have been bulldozed by the Taliban. All of this torment is due to their work for the DoD, their continuing loyalty to the U.S., and their refusal to align themselves with the Taliban. As a veteran, I feel a deep sense of moral injury over our unfinished mission. I carry guilt for abandoning these allies and anger at feeling abandoned myself. I hear daily about their hunger, fear, and their eternal hope that the U.S. hasn't abandoned them. My sense of duty prevents me from leaving this chapter behind me because of the promise I made and the commitment my country extended to those who risked everything. My struggle is not just personal. Active duty, veterans, current and former frontline civilians, and private citizens have been laboring since 2021, ensuring our nation's commitment is honored. Within this coalition of volunteers, this mission has led to divorces, job loss, post-traumatic stress, moral injury, and financial ruin. The SIV program was created to protect Afghan allies who risk their lives to support U.S. missions. offering them a pathway to safety in recognition of their invaluable service and sacrifice. SIVs are the most heavily vetted immigrant population. I encourage Congress and the administration to immediately resume the visa issuance and relocation of Afghan SIVs and all eligible allies. The government must honor its commitments and provide these individuals with the opportunities promised to them. Fulfilling our obligations should not only be a matter of policy, but is a moral imperative. To deny or delay this entry is to perpetrate the harm and betray the values we claim to uphold. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gasper. I would like to recognize that Congressman Peters from California has joined us, and also want to state that when it's time for question and answers, I will have my colleagues go first and I'll ask questions last. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Rushing for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today on the past, present, and potential future of the U.S. government's efforts to relocate and resettle eligible Afghan allies. My name is Jessica Bradley Rushing, and I have worked on Afghan relocation efforts since the fall of Kabul in a variety of roles. First, in the office of Congressman Bill Keating, then in the State Department's office of the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, CARE, and for the last year with AfghanEvac, the primary civil society organization that worked in partnership with our government on these operations. As one of the only, if not the only person who has worked on this issue from the congressional side, in the executive branch, and then with civil society, I bring a unique perspective to the discussion, and I hope I can cut through some of the partisan narratives that have surrounded this work. Although the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was the largest humanitarian airlift in U.S. history, it was undeniably chaotic and, simply put, not enough. We left behind hundreds of thousands of Afghans who had earned a pathway to the U.S. through their service to our mission over the course of our longest war. In the immediate aftermath of the withdrawal, it was unclear whether relocation and resettlement operations would or could continue. Fortunately, with broad bipartisan public support for Afghan allies who had been left behind, the State Department's Office of the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts began this work in earnest in the fall of 2021 and eventually built out a long-term, comprehensive program to resettle vetted, eligible Afghans in the United States, which resulted in a total of about 200,000 Afghans having been resettled here in the course of the last 4.5 years. At its peak, CARE was safely and securely relocating and resettling 5,000 Afghans each month on a total of 28 flights out of Kabul to various immigration processing sites in third countries around the globe, where they completed their necessary security, background, and medical checks prior to being approved for onward resettlement to the U.S. At the rate we were working in mid to late 2024, the U.S. government could have completed the work to relocate every eligible Afghan whose case was approved by the end of the next presidential administration. Unfortunately, when the administration changed in January 2025, that work came to an immediate halt. On day one of his term, President Trump signed 2 executive orders, which caused the immediate cessation of CARE operations. Since January 2025, not a single relocation flight has left Kabul. In the months that followed, every possible legal immigration pathway available to Afghan allies was closed. Our relationships with international partners who had cooperated with us to sustain these operations have been impacted, including with Qatar, a major non-NATO ally who now has more than 1,000 Afghans stranded in limbo there on our platform in Doha. The entire CARE team has been pushed out, fired, or moved to other offices. And although Congress passed the CARE Authorization Act in the NDAA in December 2024, demonstrating its clear intent to support these operations, no CARE coordinator has been appointed. The laundry list of policy decisions over the last year that have harmed Afghans awaiting relocation and those already resettled here in the U.S. is long. Suspending refugee processing and admissions, terminating temporary protected status and humanitarian parole, enacting and expanding a travel ban, dismantling and defunding the Care Office, arresting and detaining Afghans here legally, reopening and reviewing the cases of refugees who already passed vetting, and pausing all asylum decisions and visa issuances for Afghans. Where we stand today is diametrically different from where we stood at the end of 2024. In the course of the last 12 months, the government has completely turned its back on the promise it repeatedly made through both Democratic and Republican administrations alike that if you stood alongside the U.S. mission in Afghanistan, you would earn a legal pathway to build a new life in America. Congress has the authority, the precedent, and the bipartisan will to ensure that the United States keeps its word, requiring a restart of care operations, appointing appropriate leadership to manage those operations, opening up pathways for Afghans in both the consular and refugee tracks, and funding that work. All of those things are possible and within the legislative branch's power. I am here today to ask that Congress use that constitutionally vested power to push back against the executive branch policy decisions of the last year and do what is right, morally and politically, to keep the promise we made to our wartime allies and begin to restore our national honor and international reputation in doing so. Thank you for your time, your willingness to hold this hearing, and the opportunity to answer your questions and share my perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Rushing, and I would now like to recognize Dr. Hunter for your opening statement.
Thank you. Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. On behalf of post 9/11 veterans, let me be unequivocally clear. America has a profound, moral, and non-negotiable obligation to our Afghan allies. IAVA is proud to continue to stand with those who stood with us. These are our interpreters, our guides, the partners who we stood shoulder to shoulder and bled with, and saves countless American lives. Many of them are now here on special immigrant visas, but as we have heard, many more are caught in limbo, their paths to permanent safety remaining needlessly fractured for political gains. In addition to the uncertainty this presents to the Afghan people, it also causes deep harm to the very veterans they fought alongside. But it does not have to be this way. For the past several years, supporting our Afghan allies has been a bipartisan effort, and it should remain so today. For many post 9/11 veterans, myself included, our relationship with our Afghan allies is deeply, deeply personal. We live day in and day out with the brave women and men who volunteered, and I want to stress that again, they volunteered to support us the same way we volunteered to support the American people. And our work was impossible without them. My interpreter, who has asked me to protect her identity because her family is still awaiting the next steps in their process, is one of the most courageous people that I know. She was the lifeline to the 50% of the population that was most essential for U.S. government leaders to understand. She allowed me to convey not just words from Afghan women, but feelings, sentiments, and culture, which allowed me to provide recommendations to U.S. leadership that would center Afghan women in the new politics, making Afghanistan a safer place for everyone. And after my time was done in Afghanistan, she continued to work with the U.S. government. When I went home and was safe, she stayed, committed to the future of her country and the promise that we made to her. As Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, it became increasingly clear that her life was in danger. And like so many of the brave women and men who stood alongside us, she faced death threats and went into hiding. And she is one of the lucky ones, though her family's future remains uncertain. My written statement describes the multiple pathways that Afghans can take here, and Ms. Bradley Rushing discussed how safe and secure our evacuation of Afghan allies is. And what is needed now is not to turn off that process or to regress in our commitments, but to invest more, as has been repeatedly called for by members of both parties. And this is particularly important for me because this impacts my community of veterans. Data from our most recent IAVA member survey highlights just how deeply the safety and security of our Afghan allies is intertwined with the well-being of the veteran population. These data present a damning indictment of the perceived failure of our government across successive administrations and Congresses. Just this fall, in October of 2025, over 71% of IAVA members disagreed with the statement that since 2001, the United States government has done enough to support our Afghan allies. 72% disagreed with the statement that the current president is doing enough to support Afghan allies. And over 80% disagreed with the statement that the current U.S. Congress is doing enough to support Afghan allies. Our members, many of whom sacrificed their youth and their health in Afghanistan, feel betrayed by the treatment of their partners right now. And the sense of moral injury is palpable. In that same fall of 2025 survey, 3/4 agreed that the current detention of Afghans going through the immigration process causes a deep sense of personal shame and injury. Over 2/3 agreed that the failure of the official evacuation in Kabul caused me a deep sense of personal shame or moral injury. This is not new, nor is it political to us. In the fall 2021 survey, 80% agreed that more should have been done to support the immediate evacuation of Afghan allies during the withdrawal. And 69% disapproved of the statement that I approve of the way the president removed forces and personnel in 2021. And what's more important is that our members did not sit idly by and criticize the government in the aftermath of the withdrawal. When they saw the government fail to act, breaking the promises to their sisters and brothers in Afghanistan, they sprung into action. Thousands of post-9/11 veterans stepped up to do the work with our Afghan partners and ensured that they found a way to safety. Supporting our Afghan allies now honors that work and shows a clear commitment to honoring veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. I want to thank you all for your statements, your heartfelt stories, and your commitment to this work. I now want to recognize members and my colleagues for any questions that they may have, and I will start with Congressman Keating.
I'd like to thank the ranking member, and again, thank our witnesses here. Thank the three members of our military here that served our country so well for your service. Mr. Ghafoori, thank you for assisting them. I spoke in my opening statement about the dangers that these Afghan allies of ours put themselves into during the war. But Mr. Ghafoori, I think you can speak firsthand and relay the stories of others who continue to be at great risk now, even after that is over. They're suffering from great threats and great risks now and going forward. Can you tell us and share with us some of those stories of how dangerous it is for these people now?
Thank you. Absolutely. As you all know what's happening in Afghanistan right now, those devils who killed our sons and daughters, they have the power. And they killed countless men and women in uniform in Afghanistan, those Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And the country is on their hand. And they could do whatever they want to do. They have the control, and they are hunting our allies. I know Afghan special forces who saved our men and women in uniform at missions that I was witness on that mission, like countless. But he left behind. He left his family, and he's hiding from the Taliban cave to cave. And his kids doesn't have any food on their tables because there's no one to feed that family.
Are they offering rewards for any of these people, trying to hunt them down?
Yes, and we have seen it recently that they killed a couple of our allies, and they called it disappearing. And they're saying like, okay, they are at the jail. When they went to the jail, they weren't there. They have been killed and they buried because nobody could see the evidence, and nobody should know like what's happening in the country right now. So it's not just once, it's countless families are struggling right now. My own family could not able to go to Afghanistan. They left in Pakistan, and Pakistan are deporting the Afghan people, and Afghan allies back to their country. But unfortunately, they have no place to go. And the only hope they had to come to the United States and to save their children. They didn't think that the United States one day they will leave the country and to the same people.
Well,
so nobody would think that.
Well, thank you for sharing the continued danger that exists. Ms. Gaspar and Ms. Bradley-Rushing, the State Department eliminated the Office of Care in July. And they told members of Congress that, well, this is just merely being absorbed into the Office of Afghanistan Affairs. Can you two comment on the fact that this is not an absorption, that the work that you did can't possibly be done under the current circumstances?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. So at its peak, CARE had a large staff, close to 200 individuals who worked across teams that did case management, communication, ran the platforms that we used to provide immigration processing for Afghans after they left Afghanistan prior to coming to the United States. From the beginning of this administration, the staff at CARE has been impacted by cuts. Almost immediately, there was a decision within the State Department that everyone working on a personal services contract, a PSC, within the State Department would be let go when their contract expired rather than have their contracts renewed. That meant that by February, we were already losing staff. In the spring of 2025, as you say, the Congress was notified by the State Department that CARE would be defunded and closed down. And then in July, all the remaining senior leaders within CARE were part of the reduction in force. So everyone who remained in a leadership role within the office was fired at that time, and the remaining individuals who were still there sort of worked with a skeleton staff to try and maintain some operations, but operations themselves had been stopped immediately on the first day of the administration. Since then, I left the CARE team in March of 2025, and I know from speaking to some of my colleagues who remained after me that people were pushed out at the end of their contract, people were moved to other offices, and that there's essentially no one left doing that work. And the work was not something that could be absorbed by the desk, the Afghanistan desk, because it required a lot of people. It required a lot of man hours to be able to do the logistics, to get the flights and the manifests for the flights in a timely manner. And it simply would be impossible for that office, as it had existed previously, to be absorbed into another desk. And currently there just isn't anybody doing the work.
Great.
Thank you. Ms. Gasper, I don't know if you wanted to add to that at all. I know the time's expired, but
I'll just add quickly. From our side, when it comes to engagement, one of the big powers of this effort from the very beginning is how, from the nonprofit side and the volunteers, we've been able to collaborate with the government, with the Department of State and the Office of CARE, and communicate how the policies are actually experienced by those on the ground, the Afghans, as they're traveling, and for example, like their communications as they go out and the way that they are traveling and things like that. And so as soon as the new administration started and the engagement immediately stopped, it was extremely noticed by us. It was like CARE effectively disappeared overnight.
thank you. Congressman Latimer, did you have any questions?
Yes, Madam Leader, and thank you very much for conducting the meeting. It's essential. It's unfortunate that the full committee couldn't prioritize this and make this something that every member should hear, both sides of the aisle. And I want to thank each person who shared a testimony. There's substantive things to ask, but the emotion behind what you're saying isn't lost. That there is a terrible story being written here by how Americans, which pride ourselves on being compassionate, have abandoned people, and that you have shared is not lost on us. I'd like to get a handle on, if I can, the numbers that we're talking about. And any of you can comment based on your knowledge. How many refugees are currently in some location other than the United States and other than Afghanistan that would seek to be relocated to the United States for proper treatment. If you add together whoever might be in any of these other locations, Pakistan, Doha, wherever else they might be, do we have a number that we can estimate of how many refugees are in that status?
I'm happy to speak to this, Congressman, and thank you for the question. So globally, we estimate that there are about 212,000 Afghans who remain inside Afghanistan who are eligible for relocation, and that's in both the consular track and the refugee track. About 60,000 Afghans are stranded in over 90 countries around the world, waiting for some sort of processing, whether that is for a refugee or an SIV or another type of consular case.
Okay. The deconstruction of the process by which people would be assisted obviously has to be reversed. The question is, how long do you think it would take for us to deal with the 60,000 that are stranded if on day one, whatever day one is, we could start the proper administration and adjudication of their cases?
So I think that would depend on a variety of factors. We talk about them, about Afghans who are stranded in about 90 countries around the world, and it would depend what sort of consular services and refugee processing services were available in our embassies and consulates in those locations. The actual processing of those cases does not have to take a long time. There were a lot of bureaucratic hurdles that caused those processes to take a long time, but were there to be a reopening of those pathways, if we said we could issue visas to Afghans, if we could finish the SIV processing and finish the processing of those refugee cases, depending on the
okay. I'm already trying to create, in my own mind, a sense of what a goal could be here that we could tell people. We could say, if we put this back together in the right fashion, with the right support, that's not easy enough to do. We could, over the course of a year, 2 years, be able to satisfy those 60,000 people.
We had estimated.
I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm trying to get a sense when somebody asks
I think that's a fair estimate. We had estimated during late 2024. We had estimated that if we continued at the pace we were working in the peak of CARES operations, that we would have been able to complete all of the eligible relocations and resettlements within the next presidential administration.
Right.
So that would be everybody, not just the 60,000 who are in third countries.
I'll try to use my last minute helpfully here. When we talk about the problems that we have for people who are in this country that are now being treated in a negative light because they are from Afghanistan, do we have a number that we think of the people that fall in that category, so that if we could establish a policy to treat them in some particular way, we could resolve that element of the problem? Do we know how many people fall into that category? They're here, but they're under the ICE or the DHS processing stress that. And these are estimates just so that I can understand and explain it to people who ask me these questions. If we do this, this is how many people that we can make this right for.
So individuals who came in during the evacuation, Operation Allies Welcome, most of them would or should have been able to adjust status at some point in time. However, there have been barriers to those individuals who have not yet been able to adjust status. There are tens of thousands of Afghans in the country right now who either did not have durable status or whose status is now in question. About 200,000 came in total between the evacuation and enduring welcome over the course of the next few years. Those who came in with a durable status either already had an SIV or refugee status, theoretically should be safe. However, we know that there have been calls to reopen the refugee cases. So certainly tens of thousands of Afghans fall into those categories.
I've exhausted my time, but I appreciate the general and the candor. Thank you, Madam Leader.
Thank you, Congressman. I'd now like to recognize Congressman Peters.
Thank you very much, Congressmember Kamlager-Dove. And thanks for doing this. I think it means a lot to a lot of people, and it should be at the full committee. But it's terrific to be here with you all. And I want to start with a special thank you to AfghanEvac, which has been instrumental since the beginning in doing the logistical work to protect Afghans and advocating for their policy needs. It was created to be an organization for veterans, for Republicans, Democrats, career professionals, and faith leaders alike to come together, not for politics, but because keeping faith with our allies matters. And I've seen those efforts lead to changes that saved lives. And I want to just acknowledge, Ms. Hunter, your comments that they came together. I got to visit the Ops Center right when it started. And within a week of this, it was buzzing. And it was very exciting. You could feel the energy. And I hope that that's not lost, and I don't think it will be. San Diego is home to one of the largest populations of post-9/11 veterans in any American city. And I don't know, I just get the feeling there's a lot of veterans out there. Maybe if you're a veteran, you just stand up and show us who you are. Thank you all so much for your service. Terrific. Thank you. And for veterans in San Diego, I learned that protecting Afghans who bravely fought alongside Americans is the obvious thing to do. Veterans understand when others risk their lives to save you, it's wrong to walk away when it becomes inconvenient. And that's why I've been proud to be a strong supporter of Afghans and have helped lead bills like the Afghan Adjustment Act, which would help resettle Afghans who assisted U.S. service members to be safely in the U.S. When I meet with vets in my district who served along Afghans, they tell me stories about how those folks saved the lives of American service members, showed unimaginable bravery in opposing the Taliban, and we made a promise to those individuals that if they protected our troops or worked to oppose the Taliban at great risk to themselves, the government would have their back in the United States. It's not a new idea. This is exactly what we did in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, when the U.S. helped evacuate 125,000 Vietnamese who helped the U.S. military and faced the risk of persecution when the government fell and the communist government took over. The U.S. should not make false promises to people that put them in extreme danger. We should be clear that those who assisted the United States are in extreme danger if they are forced to return to Afghanistan, as we've heard from the witnesses. It's not just important to help Afghans for their own sake, but because if we allow Afghan allies to be sent back to Afghanistan, we know that the next time our military needs help from locals for operations in a foreign country, those people will think twice about any promises we make to them. This means United States troops operating without support in dangerous places, putting those troops at even greater risk. Abandoning our friends makes America weaker. We will be seen around the world as a weaker ally because we're unable to follow through on our promises, and we'll be seen by our adversaries as a weaker rival because our allies will be less committed to stand with us against those adversaries. And that's why I'm furious and heartbroken to see the administration's efforts to prevent Afghan allies from making it to the U.S., jeopardizing the legal status of those already here, and cutting the resettlement services necessary to help Afghans thrive once they have arrived. I know you get it in this room, and appreciate you coming here to help us get that word out. Mr. Ghafoori spoke very eloquently about how processing shutdowns translated into real consequences for Afghans trying to reunite through lawful channels. I have a question for Commander Gasper. You've spoken about the moral injury carried by veterans who make promises to Afghan partners and then see those promises not carried through. How does the government in action after a conflict ends compound that injury for service members and veterans?
So it was, I think, very difficult to watch the Taliban roll into those streets in Afghanistan, especially in Kabul in August of 2021. For me and for other veterans, that's not some place far away. Those are real streets to me. Mm-hmm. And those are real places. And that was very hard for me, the way that we withdrew and the way that evacuation came down. And moral injury, the way that I define it, is when your leadership acts in a way that is unexpected and is an effect of betrayal. And then to leave our allies behind on top of that. And it's just breaking the promise. The government broke their promise to them, but they broke their promise to me as well.
Yeah. Thank you all again. My time has expired, but I appreciate your service and your willingness to come today, tell us your stories. And thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. I would now like to recognize the ranking member of the full House Foreign Affairs Committee, and also representing New York, Congressman Gregory Meeks.
Let me first thank you, Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove. You know, your leadership in convening this timely shadow hearing, is just, your leadership is just superb. This is something that has been your passion and deep, and you wanted to represent, and so I want to thank you. I want to thank and welcome our witnesses and thank them for taking the time to brief us on this critical issue. You know, it is, in my estimation, unconscionable that Democrats were forced actually to hold this hearing unofficially. Republicans should have held this as an official hearing where both Democrats and Republicans were present. At the very least, because what we tried to do, and I know that you did this, Representative Kamlager-Dove, we invited Republicans to come here because we thought that this was such a key issue and very important. You know, after all, you know, there were a number of hearings that we had, and Republicans held numerous hearings and events on Afghanistan in the last Congress, which regularly departed from honest fact-finding into pure political theater to blast basically then President Biden, and that's all that was about. We wanted to do some real fact-finding to get some issues out there, the truth. But the key is yet, you know, since then, as President Trump has abruptly ended all Afghan relocation efforts and upended bipartisan policy meant to help our Afghan allies who risk their lives to support our 20-year war. My Republican colleagues, their silence has been deafening. Haven't heard anything from them. And while I appreciate Assistant Secretary Kapoor's appearing earlier today, Afghanistan was only one of the many topics in his remit, and we still have many, many, many unanswered questions. We hope that we will have some dedicated hearings on Afghanistan soon. I know that Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove and I wrote to Chairman Mass and Subcommittee Chairman Heinzinger last July, urging them to act. And of course, they have failed to do so. You know, until Donald Trump took office, supporting the relocation of our Afghan allies to safety had been a bipartisan goal. We worked across the aisle to advance Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove's reforms to strengthen the Office of the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, or CARE. But despite support from both sides of the committee, Republican leadership pulled it from last year's NDAA. They pulled it. It appears as though our Republican colleagues will abandon their convictions, even their own bills, rather than risk going against the President of the United States. And the victims of their retreat include our Afghan allies, who are now stuck in limbo, separated from their families, or even been sent back to the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. So we've convened this shadow hearing to better understand the human impact of the Trump administration's policy changes on Afghanistan and where to go from here. Changes that some may claim are just administrative, an exception for SIVs that wasn't kept in the latest travel ban, a closure of the State Department office, or a Federal Register notice ending temporary protected status. These things have had massive impacts on the lives of thousands of people, including U.S. veterans and their loved ones. Congress has a responsibility to review these policies and develop appropriate legislative reactions. So I've repeatedly said during this and prior administrations that this topic should not be a matter of politics. This should not be politics. We want this shadow hearing and these policies to be bipartisan. But we refuse to let the issue go away simply because Republicans wish to avoid crossing Donald Trump. and we won't abandon our friends and allies. So, I still believe Republicans and Democrats alike want to do the right thing, especially by our Afghan allies. And there's an opportunity to reverse some of the disastrous decisions that have put their lives and livelihoods in jeopardy. So I know I missed some of your testimony, but I've been told of what some of them are, of what has been. And I just want to just state that we will never forget our allies and those that put their lives on the line for American people. And I'll just ask a couple of questions real quick. First one to Dr. Hunter is, why is it important, in your view, that Congress find a way to act now to help Afghan allies find safety, not just wait for a different administration or a change in the political winds?
Thank you so much for that question. And for why now, there are two main reasons. One, as we had heard, there are tens of thousands of Afghans whose life is in limbo right now, and something that can be actually done pretty quickly and cleared. There are hundreds, potentially hundreds of thousands of Afghans who are here who are at risk and fear for their lives every single day because of how they are being targeted by nothing else than the color of their skin right now. And waiting another few years until there might be a change in political winds means some of them are going to die. And this is particularly dire when we're talking about Afghan women, many of whom are still in Afghanistan or in limbo in a third country, who are at extreme danger because of the current policies in Afghanistan that exist. And telling them to go back to Afghanistan or sending them back to Afghanistan is a death sentence, and that death sentence isn't going to wait for a change in the political winds. And the second reason is what it does to our veterans community. As we have been told, this is a profound sense of moral injury. We finally saw the VA suicide report that just recently came out. And surprise to probably no one here, the numbers are worse than they have been in the past. The rates of veteran suicide continue to go up despite the fact that we are not embroiled in wars right now. This is the time that historically, as someone who's a big public policy nerd, we should see rates starting to go down because we actually have the ability to invest in our veterans here at home and we're not sending them through consistent deployment cycle after deployment cycle after deployment cycle. But the numbers aren't telling that story. And what we do know from talking to our veterans is that it's not just 2021 that was a problem, the aftermath of that, but that 3/4 of them are saying that the shame that they are feeling for how Afghans in this country are being treated right now is worse than how things were in 2021. And it's worse because things were getting better, right? Like things were bad in 2021, but we started to improve. We did things like set up care. We had a very strong connection through organizations like AfghanEvac and faith communities that signaled to our veteran population that the government is taking this seriously. Like, yes, we screwed up. Now we're actually going to deliberately and bipartisanly fix that. And going back on that promise puts Afghans' lives at risk and veterans' lives at risk. And waiting for political changes is going to mean more dead Afghans and more dead veterans.
Thank you. Mr. Ghafoori, you've highlighted, I'm told, about several heartbreaking cases of family separation caused by sudden changes in policy. How would you characterize the way these Afghan allies were treated by the United States government in the past year?
Thank you, sir. It's countless allies are struggling here and outside. Most of those families who came in 2021, they have not received their documents, their legal documents, to have their lives to work legally here. Some of them, they have a work authorization card. It has 1 year or 2 years. It will get expired, and anywhere they will get caught by ICE and will be deported. Nobody will know like how they came to the United States. So if you don't have like a legal documents, how to get a job here? So those families brought here, and they applied legally. They have their pro bono lawyers. They applied to their asylum, to work authorization card, to their green cards, but unfortunately they have not received it yet. It has been 2 years that I am working personally with 150 families, new arrivals in Charlotte, North Carolina. Like most of them, 90% of them has this issue. And they haven't received their documents at all. In Afghanistan, in Pakistan, they have no place to go. They have nowhere else to go to be safe with their families.
Let me just ask Ms. Rushing. I think as of a few months ago, there were no active pipelines for Afghan allies to find safety in the United States. And getting them back open is, I know, an urgent priority. But the pace of Afghan relocations have been hobbled since Donald Trump took office. Maybe you could tell us, what does CARE need in order to succeed, and what operational improvements should we prioritize if relocations resume?
Thank you for the question. The work that CARE was doing at the scale that we were doing it in late 2024 would have meant, as I've said, that we could have completed the operations by the end of this current presidential term. In order to turn that back on, CARE would need, obviously, to have a coordinator appointed to run the office. It would need to be restaffed. But the infrastructure is there to restart the operations. The knowledge of what we did is there. We relied heavily on international partnerships as well, though. We had, anytime an Afghan was relocated out of Afghanistan, they would stop in a third country at a processing platform there. We had platforms at our peak in Germany, Albania, and Qatar, where we could house about 6,000 Afghans at any given time. Those were partnerships that were vital for that work, and so the diplomatic work would need to be done in order to create that pipeline again. I think as a priority, passing the Enduring Welcome Act to compel the executive branch to restart operations would be an incredibly important first step. And then seeing the actual appointment of a coordinator and restaffing and sort of reopening those pathways would require, both the consular and the refugee tracks would require an exception essentially made for those Afghans who qualify in either of those.
Thank you. Lastly, one last question, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gasper and maybe to Dr. Hunter also. How would your own military service have been different if you had not had the local allies willing to step up and assist U.S. forces? And would you and the others you fought alongside been at greater risk? What impact could that have had on the battlefield and or recruitment and retention in the United States forces?
Thank you for that question. So as far as my experience in 2018 and 2019, I was the chief operating officer of a intelligence platform, and we could not have existed if it wasn't for our local staff. We relied on them exclusively for providing our outward-facing presence. They were all of our guards. We did not have U.S. personnel guarding our compound, and they did all the interacting with any of the local population. It was outside of the green zone, and it was just a compound that existed all on its own. So the mission would not have existed if it wasn't for them.
Similarly, there's no way we could have done the work that we have done, particularly engaging with Afghan women, working for senior military and government officials in Afghanistan, 99.9% of whom are men. So even if they were fluent in the language and fluent in the culture, there would not have been the ability to get access to over 50% of the population. And if we are doing counterinsurgency operations, if we are engaging in the population, and if we are presenting ourselves not as an invading force, but a force that is actually here for good, having relationships with the population is essential. And just given the makeup of our senior military and government leaders, there is no way that could have happened had we not had the willingness of Afghan women to step up and put themselves at double risk, because they were often bucking their own families and putting themselves at risk from their own families as well as now from the government, and we owe them everything.
Thank you. Thank all of you. It really is a very valuable testimony. I'll close as I started. I wish that this was a bipartisan hearing, an official hearing, that everybody could hear, because this should not be about politics. You know, we're not doing this we're doing this because we think it's the right thing to do. Your stories and how our allies, should not leave them behind, and how they impacted your services. And so I thank Ranking Member Sidney Kamlager-Dove for insisting that the subcommittee do this hearing. And I really thank you, and just say that I'm going to talk to some of my Republican colleagues. These policies have to change now, just as we testified to. So I'm going to talk to some that we, had worked with. This committee previously was one that was seen as the most bipartisan committee in all of Congress. We didn't have these kind of disputes and differences that are taking place right now. So I'm going to go back to them and say, at least join me on this issue. I mean, at least join me on this issue. Let's not put a D or an R on it. This is an American issue, and let's join it. So thank you so very much for your testimony today. And thank you for insisting on me do this channel here.
Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks, for your questions and for your closing statements. I want to piggyback actually on the last question you asked. And Dr. Hunter, I know you shared a little bit, but if there's anything else you wanted to add, I wanted to give you a couple of moments because you mentioned that you served alongside a female Afghan interpreter. You just sort of talked about how invaluable they were. And I didn't know if you wanted to add any additional information to what value the female interpreters provided to the U.S. mission and some additional specific vulnerabilities that were faced or that are faced by our female interpreters who've been left behind.
Thank you so much for that question. And in addition to the work similar to what I did with that was at high-level officials, female interpreters were essential for village stability operations and the work of our special operation forces that were well far beyond on the wire, operating in some of the most remote parts of Afghanistan. And it was essential for three big reasons. One, for the safety of our U.S. and NATO allied forces, because women, as is the case in too many societies, women are often seen as invisible people in the room. And yet they were in every room where Taliban operations were being planned. They were in every room when large scale of movements was being planned. And they knew. And they knew where weapons were stored. They knew when attacks were going to happen. And working with the Afghan population saved countless numbers of lives. It's impossible to actually go back and determine just how many lives these brave women saved by saying, I will tell you where things are. I will tell you. Additionally, the work of Afghan women interpreters was essential for saving the lives of countless numbers of Afghan children, because the Afghan women were willing to work with U.S. military medical personnel on things like childbirth for other Afghan women, on getting sick or injured children, the care that we need. And had we not had these brave women who would work with U.S. servicewomen to come say, these are people, even outside of a war zone, right? These are people who need help because they are sick. This is someone who's had complications delivering a baby. And what that does is not just save that individual life, but if you talk about the idea of America and who we are supposed to be as an example, we are those that are there to help everyone, right? That we are there spreading goodwill. And when we do things like that, it's much more easily believed that we are here actually spreading goodwill, that we're not here as an invading or an occupying force, but are here to provide stability to people that we say we believe in. And it's incredibly upsetting right now because of some of the very unique challenges that Afghan women face. We were making progress. I will say we as in like a race of women, we're making progress in more rights that we're having. Women were getting more and more access to education, There were laws against child marriage that was getting passed. Women were allowed to engage in commerce and own small businesses. And you actually saw a lot of women from Afghanistan who had left under the Taliban and had become educated in other countries come back and be professors and be open small businesses and help mentor a whole new generation of women. And we know there is tons of empirical research that shows that when you educate women, you empower them to open small businesses, the entire society thrives. And now with Taliban rule coming back in, those women who worked with U.S. forces, not only are they under the same threats of anyone who has, but they are under unique threat for being betrayers of their sex. They can be publicly executed. They are going back to being stoned to death. They have been removed. We have seen women who are educated now being ripped out of jobs and professions that they have had and been told, you're going to be in jail, you're going to be killed, or you can go back and sit faceless and not have a role in society anymore. And so in addition to the general targeting that is happening, we now have, and we're seeing this unfortunately happen by members of their own family who are trying to fly under the radar and sort of do the right thing by the Taliban government right now as well.
Thank you. Ms. Rushing, you have been to CAS, where over 1,000 Afghans have been stranded since relocation pathways were effectively frozen last January, and the administration is now offering to pay Afghans at CAS to self-deport back to the Taliban. I can't even wrap my head around that. But is CAS a place that is appropriate for holding people long-term? And how does the administration's bribes prey on the desperation of the people there?
Thank you for that question. So yes, I visited CAS as well as the platform that we had in Germany and Albania. And while CAS was set up to be a completely adequate and satisfactory temporary housing facility, it is not designed for long-term living. And many of the services that were initially provided to those individuals who were transiting CAS at the peak of our operations are no longer available. So during 2024, there was a school, so anybody who was there with children could have their kids in class for several hours a day. There were recreational facilities so that people had access to things like a soccer field or music classes to do something to pass the time while they waited for their immigration processing to be completed. At this point in time, very few services remain available to those individuals who are stuck there in limbo. There are essentially emergency medical services and food services, but much of the other time that they could have spent there's nothing left for people to do. The housing situation there, again, is a former DoD base that is now managed by the State Department. The housing situation is not ideal for a long term. Each of the warehouses where we have housing, lodging established have a series of rooms set up with bunk beds, closets, wardrobe sort of closets, but the actual roof, the ceiling of the room is not a solid ceiling because there's a sprinkler system above in the warehouse, so there's no ability for real privacy. It is not a place where people should be living long term.
It sounds like it. Ms. Gasper, you've been working to help Afghan SIVs since the U.S. withdrawal in 2021 on top of your day job. So can you share with us why you have devoted so much of your time to this effort and what keeping our promise to them means to you?
Thank you for that question. So I think it's hard for people that weren't involved in the withdrawal to really wrap their heads around how deeply traumatic it was for all of us that were involved in it. And I know that's hard to imagine considering that most of us were virtual, but it was, I think, the most traumatic experience of many of our lives, even for those of us that have been in combat. And I think even though there were highs and there were lows, there were successes and there were failures out of that, the biggest takeaway was the mission is not complete. And for me, especially, that was the biggest takeaway. And the thing is I have, of all the people that I've helped over the last 4.5 years, which is outside of just those that I've supervised, because there are a lot of different people in this coalition that have their own people that they work with. I have those 65 families with the 65 principal applicants that I worked with. And my mission is not complete until all 65 of those families are out of Afghanistan. And that's when I know that I can rest, and not before then.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say to you and all of the veterans that are here that I apologize on behalf of this country for letting you down and for us not keeping our promise to you by doing right by your allies. I apologize. So, Mr. Ghafoori, you work with Afghan SIVs in North Carolina through your Interpreting Freedom Foundation. So can you please share what has been the psychological impact of the administration's rhetoric and policies on the Afghans that you work with?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the family that they are living in my community in North Carolina, Charlotte, they are in fear and stress. They can't even go outside like that they were going before, like peacefully to go get their grocery or to have fun with their kids at the park or something like that, but not anymore. They don't have those happiness anymore. They are under the pressures that they will get deported today or tomorrow because they have all those stress and anxiety that when they will get their legal documents from the government to receive it from the USCIS. Unfortunately, none of those families received their documents. They applied. It's been 4 years that they keep coming to my office and asking for help to how to get our legal documents. We applied. We went to the attorney's office. We completed our applications, but we haven't heard since then. I have no words to those families. So what's happening with their cases and what they cannot even get a place to live, unfortunately. There's a lot of our Afghan allies, they came with skills and experiences that they want to open up businesses, but they could not able to, lack of the documents that they haven't received it yet.
Thank you for sharing that. And please, you said, what can you tell them? Hopefully one thing you can share with them is that this hearing happened, and there was a congresswoman from Los Angeles who's also apologizing to them for the mistreatment and the miscare that they have received from us by not keeping our promise to them. I hope that it is also clear through holding this hearing that my colleagues and I are not going to stop pushing this issue. We worked really hard. We worked really hard to get it into the NDAA. And it was a slap in the face at the 13th hour to have it taken out because of politics and partisanship. That was all it was, because we had worked to make it bipartisan. And I have to believe that if we could do it once, that with the help of the stories that you all have shared today, that we can find a way to get it into another bill and have it passed. I serve on this committee with veterans who have their own stories, who have their own traumas, and who have their own relationships with allies and interpreters and folks who helped them come back home. And you have my commitment that we are going to work to tap into that compassion and humanity and diplomacy to get these questions answered, to get the programs back up and running, and to make sure that we honor the promises that we said that we would keep. I know that votes have been called, so I'm going to formally close this shadow hearing. But once again, I want to say thank you to our witnesses for sharing of your time and your story. Thank you to the veterans and the veteran groups that showed up today, and you continue to inspire us. And thank you to those in the audience that are supporters and allies of this work. And with that, we will officially close out the shadow hearing.
Thank you.
I work at Relocation International. Oh, amazing! Thank you for your email blast. Yeah. So my name's Mohammed, and I lead our conversion project across our foreign policy portfolio. We have we just wrote a report specifically